Move, children. Vámonos.
Está atrás de garage. Está atrás de ahí. It's behind.
To talk with us. Now, if you recall, Doug, before I started to interview her, and before I started to interview her, she was extremely nervous, just like the previous day. But then after I asked her the first question, and it was simply, Talia, please tell us what happened to you.
Toma tu tiempo, yo sé que es difícil. It's extremely traumatized, this girl.
She just stood there and trembled, head to foot, trembled. For probably a good 2 minutes, just stood there silent, trembling. She could not speak. Obviously something very traumatic had happened to her right there in the backyard where we were standing. And the assailants were my height, I'm 6'1", reminded her of the assailants because they were very tall. So what happened to Talia? What happened to this young lady is that one night, one evening, she was picking fruit from her tree. And this was right after dusk, so it just got dark. She's picking fruit from the tree. She's knocking the fruit down with this long stick, and the fruit falls to the ground. Talia proceeds to bend over and pick up the fruit that fell to the ground, and there are under the tree there are some dead leaves, and suddenly she feels this gust of wind behind her, and the leaves she notices rustle as she goes to pick up the fruit. She feels this gust of wind, and the leaves are rustling a little bit on the ground, and so she looks behind her, and what does she see? She sees a person coming up the hill, because the backyard is kind of a little gully. It's forested. There's some jungle there between the other houses. So it's this little gully. We have it on film. And she sees this guy, this person, this thing coming up the hill almost as if he's surfing on one of these circular platforms. And he comes up the hill and he lands next to her, and then immediately grabs her. He seizes her from behind, and he places his hand over her mouth. So he's got her from behind, and he's got his hand over her mouth so she can't scream. Then she sees another one of these guys coming on another platform up the hill, and lands and positions himself in front of her and grabs her leg. So now she is being held by two of these pelacaras, face peelers, one behind her with the hand over the mouth, and the other has her legs. The description she gave me of these individuals is identical to what everybody else was saying to us. They were dressed head to foot in black body armor. She even described the body armor in greater detail than anyone else. She described how it was on the forearms and on the shins, and the chest was some sort of like a breastplate, metallic, and they were wearing these helmets, these large helmets, elongated helmets. I covered the entirety of their faces. So the very same description that everybody else gave to us, this is what Talia encountered. They were very tall. One of them, which she calls the gringo, was taller than me, considerably taller than me. The other, I think she said, was about my height, if I recall. That one I dubbed the Peruvian. The reason why is because, according to Talia, these individuals spoke Spanish. The taller one, she says, spoke Spanish like me, like a gringo with an accent, and the smaller one spoke like a Peruvian. And I specifically asked Talia, the Spanish that this individual spoke, was there an accent? Was it Ecuadorian? Was it Bolivian? Was it Cuban? Or did it sound like Peruvian? Did they have an accent? She said he sounded just like all of us. So I started calling this individual the Peruvian. So that's how I'm going to refer to them. The Peruvian face peeler and the gringo face peeler We don't know if they're people. I'm not saying they're human beings. This is the testimony that Talia gave us there in her backyard. So these individuals have her in this manner, but they're hovering, mind you. They're hovering on these platforms, and they proceed to lift her up. Now, I don't recall, Doug, if she was telling us something about how she was speaking very, very softly. She was very nervous. She was telling us something about how they attempted to lift her off the ground but couldn't. Somewhere in the course of this encounter, they were attempting to lift her off the ground, and for some reason they were having a hard time. So they took her behind this hut that's there on the property, and then they proceeded to take out a powder. The Peruvian put some powder in his hand, and then he put some cream. He had this little bottle with cream in it, and he mixed the powder and the cream together. Then he took a nasal syringe, he sucked up the substance and shot it up her nose. And she even tells us that at that point she heard the Peruvian guy say, be careful, don't apply too much. You're going to ruin the flesh. And then she later explained that what she heard them saying was something about how if they apply too much, the flesh is going to stick to the skin when they take it off. Something along those lines. It wasn't exactly clear, but something like that. And then, and I may be skipping some minor details, and then they took out one of them took out a small device that you and I think is a laser scalpel, and they began to make an incision in her neck. In other words, they were very likely going to peel her face off, just like the legends say. At this moment, Talia began to struggle. She began to lift up the mask, the helmet of the guy behind her, the gringo holding her from behind. And as she was doing this, somebody, I think it was him, or if not the Peruvian guy who was holding her legs, one of them slapped her in the face. And when they did this, they dropped her. And this gave her a moment in which her mouth was no longer being covered, and she was able to scream. So she hits the ground, she screams. Her brother and her family members are on the other side of the house on the porch, sitting there outside. They have their flashlights on them. Talia's brother gets on the scene with his flashlight. The neighbors are up higher on the hill. They come down with their flashlights, and they all see the same thing. What they see are two individuals, these two individuals we just described, dressed in black, head to foot, very tall, hovering on these platforms, on these circular platforms. And Talia is lying there on the ground, bloodied up from the incision in her neck. Her face is swollen. And Talia says that at this moment, she heard the Peruvian face peeler say to the gringo, let's go, let's get out of here. And the gringo replied, no, we can't just leave her here. And according to Talia, he proceeded to grab her by the hair and try to drag her and perhaps lift her off the ground on his platform. The neighbors see this, they have their flashlights, they start to yell, and eventually the gringo drops her, and these guys maneuver themselves to where there's an opening in the trees, and they lift off the ground at a high rate of speed and disappear into the sky.
One of the things to understand here is that this is an area that is residential. It's surrounded by houses. Where this event happened was in her backyard. It's the one fruit tree that's in her backyard. Down a slope is a big chicken coop type thing, and then it goes back uphill, and that's where supposedly Talia was found by her father or brother, one of the two.
No, she was not found on the hill. She was found actually lying behind the
Este impresionante video captó ese instante en que los habitantes le disparan a los supuestos seres, como ven, en medio de la noche. Los vecinos dicen que están aterrorizados. Ellos describieron a los entes como gigantes que miden casi 7 pies de altura y que visten trajes que parecen de astronautas. Vamos a escuchar.
Son extraterrestres estos señores, son vestidos con blindados, son tipo del hombre verde que persigue el hombre araña, igualitos, son señores. Yo les valió 2 veces y no caen, en vez de que caen se elevan y se desaparecen, señores.
Los miembros de la comunidad están haciendo vigilias por las noches para protegerse y tratar de capturar a los supuestos seres extraterrestres que dicen habrían atacado a una joven.
¡Ahí está! ¡Ahí dale! ¡Dale, mira ahí! Vete de su huerta, vete de su huerta. De su huerta, vecino. De su huerta, vete. Rápido. ¡Jonathan, no entres! ¡Lárgate, no porquería! ¡Lárgate! Ahí sigue. Ahí sigue.
In footage captured in Peru in August 2023, shaky flashlight beams illuminate trees while frightened onlookers shout that they've possibly spotted an extraterrestrial. For a few brief seconds, the camera captures a dark figure behind a tree trunk, featuring 2 large black eyes and a sizable head. The anonymous videographer and his companions seem deeply unsettled by this sighting. Their panicked voices and trembling flashlight beams suggesting they believe they've encountered alien life in the dark Peruvian woods.
New attack in Peru reported. Alien attack.
Un hecho extraño alarmó el fin de semana a las familias de la localidad de Santa Ana del Río Mayo, luego que una madre de familia